So I want to get philosophical for a moment. What is meaning?
You're being very difficult. If we were to look at meaning in a different sense, we'd say that the essence of meaning is the ontology. You first have to share the same ontological basis. And the ontology that we have as people of faith and values, Jews and Christians, is very different than the ontology of Muslims, Marxists, Hindus, Buddhists, etc. So at the root of it, if we're going to do it in a classical sense, would be the ontology. What we believe is that it's a real world, real pains, real suffering, then you need a real Savior. Now we're going to argue about did the Savior come or not, but we don't believe in the opposite would be radical Hinduism, where they tell Mother Teresa, this poor person starving on the street is just an illusion.
Matter don't matter.
No, it doesn't matter at all. And Mother Teresa takes the person up and they try to drag her in 1948 to the funeral pyre because they're so upset, because the very act of her saving these people gives
Meaning.
It gives reality, meaning. That's it. So the ontology is very important. Right? And the epistemology is the next step. And of course that means, how do we know that it's a real world? And for, you know, for many people that say, we don't know, we can never know. Well, then how do we know this poor person that Mother Teresa is picking up off the dirt, or the one that Superman was talking about that was asking for a savior, if you want to put it in mythic terms? How do we know that that person needs help? Maybe that person doesn't need help. Maybe we're misinterpreting their cries, etc. But maybe it's just flatus voci, as Baehr said. And so we believe that there is real truth, that there is real communication, there's truth, there's real knowledge, that when somebody's really suffering, we know that, and it's our call to meet the needs of the suffering. And the interesting thing is that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what the philosophy is, you know, and I've taught in Cambodia and Japan and whatever it is, at school associations. I'm going to be in Korea in 3 weeks. Wherever you are in the world, in spite of what their thoughts about what meaning is, when they watch a movie, they gravitate toward movies with a real world, real pain, real suffering. They want good over evil, and they want a real savior. Whether that savior is Superman or Avatar or whatever it happens to be. They want somebody to actually come into the world and change the world in a positive way.
So can you make meaning? And if so, how do you make it?
Well, film is always creating, as well as using different parts of what's available to it to create. But yes, the film creates meaning, and it creates value, and it creates perspectives toward those values, in other words, morals. It creates that whole bundle of activity that's going on.
How do you know when you've made it?
How do you know? Well, when Bambi came out, the hunting industry was a $9 billion industry, and after Bambi it went down to $4.5 billion. They gave a whole new perspective toward deer, that people no longer wanted to go out and shoot.
So there's a bottom line on meaning.
Right. When Rebel Without a Cause came out, you know, they had a really silly scene in it where he's poking tires. I think it's Sal Mineo who's poking tires, and kids the next year, tires are being poked all over America. There have been 500,000 studies on the mass media of entertainment. From what we can see, and this may just be the words of the Media Literacy Organization and others, there's only been one study that says that the entertainment industry doesn't have an influence. And that was done by ABC in 1985, and it's never been replicated. And we know that ABC doesn't believe it because they're still selling ads for the Super Bowl or whatever, and you wouldn't sell ads if it didn't have an influence in people buying the product. So people see their identity and now their meaning in what they buy, what they use. Did they get the latest iPad? Did they get the latest app for their iPhone? Are they how often?
Are they willing to put $12 down for a movie ticket because
that's right,
someone they trusted?
Which is all hype. You don't want to go there because you're going to make a movie, and then you're going to, you don't want to be thinking, oh gosh, what am I doing? I'm taking advantage of these poor people. I love it. I was in St. Louis, and the cab driver, I was going to meet with the head of a PCA Mid-America division, and this cab driver said, "Are you going to go see the Rolling Stones?" And I said, "No, I didn't even know they were here." And he said, "Gosh, this is their final performance."
Again.
He really bought this one.
So Ted, what happens when you make a meaningful film?
But we do know that different people respond differently to different stimuli. Some people respond to violence. And we know that in terms of movies and entertainment, that's 7 to 11% of the kids. So you get a movie like New Jack City, and the day it opens, 31 people are shot or knifed in the theaters. You know, so it's got an impact. It stirred up the violence in those. We know that within that group that's violent, a Dartmouth study, just to continue, showed that recently that kids with unrestricted access to R-rated films have a 25% propensity. 25% of them start drinking at a younger age. Now, what does that say to you? The 7 to 11% of the 25%. One, it's not 100%. Two, we know what happens to the rest of that percent. You have the 7 to 11% in the case of violence who want to replicate the violence, usually tall, you know, the guys who are the big men on campus, or at least they think they're going to be impervious to pain and suffering. Then you've got a group that says that it's not bothered by it. You know, they're sort of the people who walk by the person dying on the streets of New York and pay no attention to it, or in Bombay, if we want to go back to Mother Teresa, Calcutta, excuse me. And then you have 30% in the case of violence who get upset by the violence. They're usually women, children, who put more locks on their door, they get more concerned by it. So just within that propensity, the violence propensity, you've got 3 different reactions.
But the movie moves them
Toward either one of those reactions. And the reaction that you don't study the most is the middle one, the one that says, we're not influenced by it. But does that mean that you become callous? Does that mean you become uncaring? What does that mean for you? Because we'd have to live in a society where caring is the only daring. That's why your daughter's going into social work. You want caring.
Hey, what about a movie that is redemptive? And you can even use that word now in Hollywood, whereas you couldn't use it 20 years ago.
Well, when the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe came out, because many years ago I did the CBS version, you know, that Disney, God bless them, was trying to distance themselves from the religious aspects of the book.
De-Jesusify?
They said, is this about Jesus? And I quoted, well, C.S. Lewis wrote this little letter to Lucy, you know, 6 months before he died, his last letter that we know, and he said, it's all about Jesus. So if it was good enough for him. And then the next question, and I can show you on my computer, I can even give you a cut of this, is, well, are people going to be, you know, is this going to be evangelistic? Because that's a great fear. And I believe, and maybe I've grown up with too much film theory, that for the people who are open, they'll be moved by it. It's like, you know, the violence or the, you know, some people have a propensity toward whatever it happens to be. If this is the moment that they have that propensity toward being open to redemption, they will be touched by it. And I think more people are open to redemption than are open to sex, violence, nudity, profanity, because their lives are tough, they're in pain, they're suffering, and they want hope, they want healing, they want grace, whatever. And redemption is a big word. You know, let's say right now, I just want healing, and I'd love to have healing for Lily, who's been on chemotherapy for 16 years. So those are much more defined. You know, Jesus gives us the comforter. Well, I like that, but, you know, and the advocate. I don't really need that right now. I just need the healer, Christ. So we can tell a lot of stories that have a lot of great things that'll touch people. There's so many people who need so many different aspects of the gospel, and it'll move them to tears.